What if the story of New Mexico, a state of high desert mesas, adobe cities, ancient pueblos, and layered cultural traditions, held a genetic history even more intricate than its storied past suggests? A groundbreaking wave of genetic research is uncovering unexpected ancestral threads woven through centuries of migration, conquest, survival, and blending. From the enduring roots of indigenous pueblo and peoples to the deep imprint of Spanish colonization, from hidden Jewish lineages to surprising traces of African and Latin American ancestry, New Mexico's DNA tells a story as complex and resilient as the state itself. Let's journey into the genetic origins of New Mexicans and discover how their DNA reveals a powerful and surprising narrative of identity, history, and transformation in the heart of the American Southwest. A genetic journey through time, the hidden roots of New Mexicans. What if the story of New Mexico isn't just written in ruins, oral traditions, and colonial records, but deep within the DNA of its people? In recent years, scientists have begun to unravel the complex genetic tapestry of New Mexicans, revealing a story shaped by ancient migrations, forgotten empires, and centuries of cultural fusion. New Mexico is often thought of as a place of stark beauty, rich indigenous traditions, and Spanish colonial legacy, but genetics tells us there's more beneath the surface. Every strand of DNA in today's New Mexicans carries a record of ancestral journeys, some stretching back tens of thousands of years. From the early Paleo-Indians who first walked this state during the Ice Age, to the waves of migration that brought in Spanish colonists, African slaves, and even Sephardic Jews fleeing persecution, the genetic makeup of New Mexicans is one of the most diverse in the continental United States. Unlike most other states, New Mexico's population has a strong indigenous continuity, meaning many people still carry genetic markers directly linked to the region's earliest inhabitants. But the story doesn't stop there. Traces of Iberian, African, and Mesoamerican ancestry show how interconnected the region became over centuries of colonialism, trade, and resistance. Some New Mexicans today even carry genetic signatures suggesting ties to conversos, Jewish converts who escaped the Spanish Inquisition. This genetic journey is more than science. It's a human story, a story of resilience, blending, and cultural survival, and it's still being written. As new DNA studies emerge, they continue to reveal long-lost connections and reshape what we thought we knew about this iconic southwestern state. In New Mexico, identity isn't just passed down in language or tradition, it's encoded in blood. Astonished by New Mexican genetic history? Subscribe for more informative videos covering different states of the U.S. Ancient migrations and the first peoples of the Southwest. Long before the Spanish conquistadors arrived, before missions and adobe villages dotted the desert, and even before the first pottery was shaped in the Rio Grande Valley, ancient peoples were already calling the Southwest home. Archaeological evidence shows that humans first arrived in what is now New Mexico more than 13,000 years ago. These early peoples, often referred to as Paleo-Indians, were part of the Great Migration out of Siberia, crossing the Bering Strait Bridge and slowly moving southward across the Americas. They hunted mammoths and bison on what were once lush plains, leaving behind arrowheads and tools that still surface today. Genetic studies reveal that these earliest settlers were not a single homogeneous group, but rather a wave of migrations over thousands of years. Some of the oldest human remains found in the Southwest, like the Anzac child in neighboring Montana, have helped scientists trace Native American ancestry back to these first migration events. These lineages continue today in many indigenous communities of New Mexico. The ancient people who settled the region evolved into complex societies. By 3,000 years ago, ancestors of today's Puebloan peoples had begun to develop agriculture, build permanent dwellings, and create intricate cultural systems that were uniquely adapted to the harsh desert environment. Genetic continuity in indigenous groups like the Zuni and Hopi suggests a deep ancestral connection to these first southwestern inhabitants. Their DNA holds clues not only to their own history, but to the broader human story of survival, adaptation, and community in one of North America's oldest, continuously inhabited regions. Understanding these ancient migrations allows us to appreciate that New Mexico's story didn't begin in the 16th century, it began millennia earlier, in the footsteps of the first people to walk its red earth. The Pueblo legacy, indigenous DNA and New Mexican identity. The Pueblo peoples of New Mexico, descendants of some of the oldest continuous cultures in North America, are central to the state's cultural and genetic heritage. From Acoma to Taos, Zuni to Santa Clara, these communities have preserved traditions, languages, and spiritual practices for thousands of years. But their legacy isn't just visible in ceremonial dances or adobe dwellings, it's also etched into the DNA of New Mexicans today. Modern genetic research confirms what oral history has long claimed. Pueblo ancestry runs deep, not just in federally recognized tribes, but across the broader population of New Mexico. Many Hispanic or Nuevo Mexicano families in the region, especially those who trace their roots back centuries, unknowingly carry indigenous genetic markers from ancient Puebloan lineages. This is largely the result of centuries of intermarriage, adaptation, and survival. When Spanish colonists arrived in the late 16th century, they encountered thriving indigenous societies. The Pueblo Revolt of 1680, a unified uprising against Spanish rule, stands as a testament to Pueblo resilience. Over time, while some indigenous communities maintained autonomy, others became intertwined with Spanish settlers, socially, culturally, and genetically. Mitochondrial DNA, passed down through maternal lines, has been especially revealing. Many New Mexicans, particularly those who identify as Hispanic, carry maternal DNA markers that link back to Puebloan and other Native American ancestors. This means the mothers of New Mexico's early colonial families were often indigenous women, an enduring reminder of Native strength and presence. The Pueblo legacy is not a relic of the past. It lives on in the people, in language, in state-based traditions, and in genetic memory. Far from fading, this heritage continues to shape the unique identity of New Mexico, an identity rooted in both resistance and continuity, in both culture and code. The Spanish arrival, colonization, and its genetic imprint. In the late 16th century, the arrival of Spanish conquistadors and missionaries in New Mexico began a new chapter of cultural exchange, conflict, and genetic blending. Led by Juan de Oñate in 1598, Spanish expeditions traveled north from Mexico into what was then a state of established indigenous civilizations. The founding of settlements like San Gabriel and later Santa Fe marked the beginning of centuries of colonial presence in the region. With the Spanish came not only soldiers and clergy, but also indigenous allies from central and southern Mexico, mainly Nahua-speaking peoples, who played crucial roles in settlement and labor. These migrations introduced new lineages into the local gene pool, adding Mesoamerican ancestry to the region's already rich indigenous base. Genetic evidence reveals that many New Mexicans today carry a mix of Native American, Iberian, and African ancestry, the latter due to the presence of enslaved Africans brought by Spanish colonists. Interestingly, mitochondrial DNA, which traces maternal lines, often shows Native American origins, suggesting that early colonial families were built around indigenous women and Spanish men. The colonial caste system, or casta, attempted to categorize people by racial mixture, but on the ground, the boundaries were far blurrier. Over generations, intermarriage and cultural fusion created a unique population that was neither wholly Spanish nor fully indigenous. This mixed identity became the foundation of today's Nuevo Mexicano community. The genetic imprint of Spanish colonization in New Mexico is distinct from other parts of the Southwest. It is older, more deeply rooted, and more blended with indigenous heritage. Far from being a straightforward conquest story, it is one of negotiation, alliance, and endurance. And today, The DNA of New Mexicans continues to carry that legacy, evidence of a complex colonial past that lives on in the present. From Mexico to New Mexico, the northward flow of genes and culture. New Mexico's genetic story is inseparable from its deep historical ties to Mexico. Long before the area became part of the United States, it was a northern frontier of New Spain, linked by trade, language, and migration to central Mexico. Over centuries, a steady northward flow of people brought not only goods and beliefs, but also genes, forever shaping the identity of New Mexico's population. Spanish colonial expansion depended heavily on settlers from central and southern Mexico, many of whom were of mixed ancestry themselves, indigenous, Spanish, African, and even Asian, through the Manila galleon trade. These settlers, known as mestizos, carried diverse genetic profiles. As they moved north into what is now New Mexico, they brought that complexity with them, layering Mesoamerican DNA over local Puebloan and Athabascan genetic foundations. One of the most powerful cultural bridges was El Camino Real de Tierra Adentro, the royal road stretching from Mexico City to Santa Fe. For over 2 centuries, it was a major artery of movement, bringing waves of settlers, missionaries, traders, and soldiers into New Mexico. Each group contributed to the gene pool, enriching the region's already diverse population. Even after the Mexican War of Independence and the eventual U.S. annexation of New Mexico in 1848, cultural and familial ties to Mexico remained strong. Intermarriage, shared festivals, cuisine, and language preserved this cross-border connection. Modern genetic analyses show that many New Mexicans today still share close genetic markers with populations in central and northern Mexico. This ongoing migration, both historic and modern, blurs national borders and highlights the enduring bond between New Mexico and its southern neighbor. In essence, New Mexico is not just a border state, it is a bridge where genes and cultures from across the Americas have mingled for centuries. Crypto-Jews and Conversos, a hidden chapter in New Mexican DNA. One of the most surprising and deeply personal revelations in New Mexico's genetic story is the hidden presence of Jewish ancestry among many families who identify as Hispanic or Catholic. This connection traces back to the late 15th century, when Jews in Spain and Portugal were forced to convert to Catholicism or flee during the Spanish Inquisition. Those who converted, often under duress, were called conversos. Some secretly maintained Jewish practices and became known as crypto-Jews. Many of these conversos migrated to the New World, seeking distance from persecution and the scrutiny of the Inquisition. Although Jewish identity was publicly erased, private traditions like lighting candles on Friday nights, avoiding pork, or unusual naming customs persisted quietly for generations. In the late 16th century, a number of these converso families came north into New Mexico as part of the Spanish colonization effort. Over time, their Jewish roots became obscured, either through intermarriage, assimilation, or fear. For centuries, the legacy remained hidden until genetics brought it to light. Recent DNA studies have found that a significant number of New Mexicans carry Y chromosome and mitochondrial markers commonly associated with Sephardic Jewish populations. These include specific haplogroups found in high concentration among Jews of Iberian descent. Many people who had no idea of their Jewish ancestry have been stunned to learn of this genetic connection, prompting both pride and curiosity about this buried past. This hidden legacy adds another complex layer to New Mexican identity. It is a reminder that culture and memory are not always aligned, and that DNA can preserve stories long forgotten by history books. In rediscovering this crypto-Jewish past, many New Mexicans are reconnecting with a spiritual and cultural heritage that survived against all odds, carried silently in their blood across continents and centuries. Intermarriage and mestizaje, the birth of a blended heritage. New Mexico's identity is rooted in centuries of intermarriage, an enduring human story of connection, conflict, and coexistence. From the very beginning of Spanish colonization in the late 16th century, mestizaje, the blending of indigenous, European, and African ancestries, defined life in the region. This was not merely cultural fusion, but biological reality, shaping the DNA of generations to come. Spanish settlers, many of the men, arrived in what is now New Mexico without European wives. They often married or formed unions with local indigenous women, Pueblo, Apache, and Navajo among them, as well as with Mexican women of mixed ancestry who migrated north. These relationships laid the genetic foundation for the Nuevo Mexicano identity, a fusion of Native American and Iberian bloodlines, with traces of African and Sephardic Jewish ancestry woven in over time. Unlike other parts of North America, where racial categories often reinforced strict boundaries, New Mexico developed a more fluid sense of identity. A person's standing was shaped by their language, religion, and community involvement as much as by racial lineage. As a result, mestizaje in New Mexico did not just happen. It was normalized, integrated, and ultimately became a cornerstone of identity. Genetic studies show that New Mexicans today carry varying degrees of indigenous mitochondrial DNA, passed down from mothers alongside paternal Y DNA linked to Iberian and Mexican ancestors. This gendered pattern reflects historical power dynamics and social structures, but also illustrates a shared, multi-ethnic legacy that is both complex and deeply rooted. The birth of this blended heritage wasn't always harmonious, but it was transformative. It produced a population unlike any other in the United States, deeply tied to state, language, and lineage. In many ways, mestizaje is not just New Mexico's past, it is its present and future. Genetic map of New Mexico. New Mexico's genetic statescape is as diverse and layered as its stunning terrain. From the peaks of the Sangre de Cristo Mountains to the high desert mesas, the people of New Mexico carry within them a complex blend of ancestral threads that span continents and centuries. Recent genetic research has begun to map this diversity, revealing not just who New Mexicans are today, but how their ancestors shaped them. The most prominent genetic components in New Mexico's population are Native American, Iberian, Spanish and Portuguese, and Mesoamerican. Native American ancestry comes primarily from local Puebloan peoples, as well as Navajo and Apache lineages, groups with distinct origins and migration histories. Mitochondrial DNA shows a strong indigenous presence, particularly in maternal lines, underscoring the historic role of Native women in family and community life. The Iberian component reflects Spanish colonizers and settlers, including both Old Christians and Conversos, Jews forced to convert during the Spanish Inquisition. Genetic markers linked to Sephardic Jewish ancestry remain present in many New Mexicans, especially in the northern part of the state. Some Y DNA haplogroups, common among Iberians, are found at significantly higher rates in New Mexico than in neighboring states. Additionally, there are signs of African ancestry, traces of enslaved people brought during the Spanish colonial period or arriving through later migrations from Mexico. These genetic threads are smaller, but historically meaningful, contributing to the state's uniquely rich heritage. Recent DNA studies have also identified subtle regional differences. Southern New Mexicans often share more recent Mexican ancestry, while northern New Mexicans tend to have deeper roots tied to colonial-era families. Altogether, the genetic map of New Mexico tells a story of persistence, movement, and mingling, a biological echo of the state's long, complicated, and beautiful history. What this changes: the discovery of New Mexico's genetic mosaic doesn't rewrite history, it enriches it. For generations, New Mexicans have proudly embraced a unique cultural identity rooted in language, state, and tradition. Now, DNA is adding a new layer of understanding to that identity, one grounded in science but deeply intertwined with heritage. The implications are personal, social, and even political. First, This genetic insight validates oral histories and family lore that were often dismissed or forgotten. Tales of hidden Jewish ancestry, indigenous lineage, or African roots are now confirmed through biological evidence, offering people a new sense of pride and connection. For many, these revelations are not just curiosities, they are affirmations of belonging, survival, and complexity. Second, it challenges rigid racial and ethnic classifications. The genetic data reveals that most New Mexicans are not just Hispanic or Native or European, but some combination of all three. This defies the neat boxes used in official forms or census categories. Understanding this complexity may push for more inclusive ways to talk about identity, not as fixed labels, but as dynamic stories that evolve over time. Third, it reframes how we think about colonization and resilience. Rather than a simple tale of conquest, the genetic evidence tells a story of negotiation, intermarriage, and adaptation. It honors the contributions of indigenous women, the endurance of crypto-Jewish families, and the influence of African and Mexican ancestors who helped build New Mexico's communities. In short, this changes how we understand New Mexico, not by replacing culture with science, but by revealing how the two are deeply intertwined. It's a call to embrace a broader, richer sense of identity, one that reflects the true depth of the state's past and its enduring spirit of diversity. What's next? As DNA technology becomes more accessible, the future of genetic exploration in New Mexico holds even greater promise. But this isn't just about ancestry kits and haplogroup charts. It's about how this information shapes identity, policy, education, and cultural preservation in the years to come. One of the most exciting developments is the potential for communities to reclaim forgotten or suppressed heritage. For families with Sephardic Jewish ancestry, for example, DNA results may inspire a renewed interest in Jewish culture, traditions, or even spiritual practices. Indigenous communities might use genetic tools to strengthen state claims, support language revitalization, or trace migration patterns once thought lost to history. There is also growing academic interest in building more detailed genetic maps that include traditionally underrepresented populations. Most global genetic databases are still biased toward European samples. By expanding the data set to include more Native American, Mestizo, and Afro-Hispanic lineages from New Mexico, researchers can create a more accurate and inclusive picture of human history in the Southwest. Educationally, these findings could be transformative. Schools and universities in New Mexico may begin to integrate genetic history alongside traditional curriculum, helping students see their biology as a bridge to understanding the state's layered cultural identity. However, these advances also come with responsibility. Questions of privacy, consent, and the misuse of genetic data, particularly within indigenous and marginalized communities, must be addressed carefully. DNA may hold truth, but it must be handled with respect. Looking ahead, New Mexico stands at the forefront of a new kind of history, one written not just in archives or monuments, but in the living code of its people. The past is no longer a mystery locked away. It's in our cells, waiting to be understood and shared. If New Mexico's genetic journey opened your eyes to the deeper stories hidden in our history, make sure to subscribe and stick with us. There's a whole map of ancestry and identity waiting to be explored across the states. Who knows? The next story might connect to your own. Let's keep uncovering the past, one strand at a time.